Good morning, everyone. I think summer has arrived. So today we are following in our pattern of giving talks on Chan Buddhism. This is a Chan monastery. So many people may be unfamiliar with Chan. Chan is the same word as Zen, but Zen from the Japanese tradition is not 100% identical with Chan. There are some differences, some of which are cultural, some historic, and some in terms of the practices. One of the difficulties in studying Chan is that from the Chinese culture and tradition, and particularly language, it's difficult for Westerners to become familiar sometimes and comfortable with Chan when the Chinese terms are used, because Chinese terms are difficult for us as Westerners because the language is very different from English and from really all European languages. And learning to understand the Chinese characters and to know that many of them have a pictographic root, so that there's a history behind the characters in many cases, particularly when it comes to the ancient characters. And then how is it that we would be able to put the sounds of these characters into English letters, what we call romanization. Has gone through several different transformations, so it becomes quite complicated. So today I'm going to try to make some sense out of this and to talk about a particular Zen master, a Chan master, who came after Lin Ji, the first great master after Lin Ji. So Lin Ji is romanized Linji in the New Pinyin, but if you read some of the earlier texts, you will see that they use a different romanization system, and it's Linchi. And when CH doesn't have an apostrophe, it has a J sound. Makes a lot of sense, right? This is the Wade-Giles system, still somewhat used in Taiwan. But in mainland China, mostly pinyin is used as a way of being able to transliterate the Chinese sounds into what we would be able to identify. So Master Lin Ji, Linji, we'll say. Of course, there are tones as well, so that makes it even more fun. He was the 11th generation after Bodhidharma. Oh my gosh, so now we're getting into the history and lineage, what we call lineage. And Bodhidharma was the 28th in the line after the Buddha. So, because Bodhidharma is counted both as 28 and as number 1 in the Chan system, then we can say Linji would be 38 generations after Buddha. So, this system of keeping track of the lineage is rather important because it shows that there's an authenticity. Like if you get a degree from a certain university, it's signed by the university, you say, okay, this person is authorized to say that they have this degree. So in the same way, there was the main person who was given, conferred as to be the person to be considered to have the best practice and understanding of the Buddhist teachings, and that person was considered what was called the patriarch, father figure of the lineage. So the Linji lineage was important because it's one of the two lineages of Chan that are still in existence today. We know the other one more by its Japanese name of Soto. And Linji would be Renzai in Japanese, so that would be the Zen term. Our interest in Linji is because we are a Linji lineage here. So we're interested in this lineage, this understanding of one teacher passing on the transmission and the authorization from one generation to the next. So some of these teachers rise to prominence, not just as the teacher of their particular monastery, of their particular time, but some of them become, their teachings become so well known, so important in the way that they teach that they're remembered and given the name of a lineage master, or a house of this particular type. So just as the importance of Bodhidharma bringing the teachings from India to China, is that Bodhidharma came from the West. And it turns out if you look at the map, where Bodhidharma was from in India and where he ended up in China, very much almost on the same latitude. Just so he came almost directly from the west, even though he came by boat through a southern route around Singapore, through an area not so far south of where Hong Kong would be. Bodhidharma considered to be a very important teacher in China. And then 6 generations after Bodhidharma, Huineng, very important teacher. And then after Huineng, then we have Linji, the 11th generation. So many people who study Chan, perhaps they are familiar with these 3 teachers, but not necessarily of the teachers in between. Only those people who maybe study a great deal and really research and look at the difference between the different teachers can go from Bodhidharma to Huineng to Linji and can recite all of the teachers. The next person that I'm going to talk about here today, I doubt if anyone has heard of him. I certainly was not so familiar with him until I began my research. Who came after Linji? And his name is Xinghua. We would spell his name in pinyin Xinghua, and Xing is first tone, Hua fourth tone. And the characters of his name means producing transformations. That would be one term. He also had a first ordination name before he became fully ordained, but we won't go into too many Chinese terms because we'll get befuddled by all of the Chinese. So he lived from 830 until 888, so not terribly long, 58 years. And he's considered the 12th generation, the Linji after the 11th generation. He's the next generation. And his teaching was very important because after the passing of the great master Linji, you need to have a person who knows the teaching well enough to continue the lineage. Easy to continue the lineage when you have a very strong, very eloquent teacher. But the teaching has to go beyond the strength of the teacher and the eloquence of the teacher. The person needs to be able to pass on the real meanings from one generation to the next so that people can benefit even if the teacher's no longer living. So Xinghua, he was from and lived and spent much of his time in a town called Xinghua. This is a city in Shandong province. So because we're not so familiar with Chinese geography even, we can imagine that the east coast of China would be similar to the east coast of the United States, except in the east coast, the belly goes inward quite a bit, but in China, the belly goes outward. So the most prominent outward part, probably you could say, would be like Shanghai. Shanghai would be like where New York might be. And if we looked at Jinan, we would say that Jinan was a little bit like where Boston would be, because there's a big cape that sticks out. It goes into the sea and goes towards Korea. It would be like Cape Cod, except this is much bigger. And so the Yellow River comes out in this area. So this is, we would say, would be a good designation, maybe like Boston. It's where Master Linji was teaching at that time, and where Master Xinghua would continue his teaching. So one of the things that we do when we begin to study Master Xinghua is we can see that it reflects back onto Master Linji, and we can learn some things about Master Linji from what he said, what was written down in the time of Master Xinghua. So this is a little talk that Master Linji gave. The term that's translated here is he's talking to the monks, and he calls them cultivators, kind of like gardeners. Cultivators. I like this term a lot. Sometimes when we see and try to understand the practice of meditation, for example, we might see that when we first begin to meditate, it's a little bit like looking at our garden and seeing that we have lots and lots of rocks and weeds in the garden. Then we start practicing and we start removing the weeds and the rocks from the garden. We have a nice path or a nice patch of ground. In this patch of ground, we can begin to cultivate. We can enrich the soil, we can put it in rows, and we can begin to plant. This is a good term, cultivators. If you want to be Buddhist, of course, this is the goal of all of the practitioners. We say we all want to be Buddhists because we want to be free from suffering. And a Buddha is a person who is an awakened one, not just one person. We say Gautama Buddha is the great teacher of his time, but we are all capable of being Buddhists. And he says, cultivators, if you want to be Buddhists, do not chase after things. When thoughts arise, all the myriad things arise. When thoughts cease, all the myriad things cease. When there is no mind, all dharmas, these are all phenomenon, are in harmony. In samsara, that's the cycle of birth and death, and in nirvana, that's the place where there is no suffering, there is no Buddha and no Dharma. This term Dharma here means teachings. Nothing manifests and nothing is lost. Whatever exists only are words and expressions. They are for teaching children, medicine to cure diseases. Besides, words are not words themselves. It is this clear, sentient awareness, that which can see, hear, feel, and know, which creates all the words and names. So this is one of the teachings of Master Linji. If we understand this and we want to add more words and conceptions to this, we can see that Master Linji is talking about from the point of view of what is called the path of seeing. In the Prajnaparamita Sutra, one of the long selections from the collection of sutras, there is this particular teaching about how we see. And there are 5 eyes that are metaphors for how it is that we see. The first one is our flesh eye that sees forms. The next is called the higher eye, sometimes called heavenly eye. I like higher eye. This eye is capable of seeing the different realms of consciousness and also how to cultivate loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. The third eye is the wisdom eye. This is the eye that can see things from the point of view of the 3 Dharma seals of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and no self. The fourth eye is called the Dharma eye. This is the eye that's cultivated by the Bodhisattvas in order to help all sentient beings. And finally, the Buddha eye, seeing things from the point of view of going beyond liberation. So these 5 eyes, very important, and they correspond to, but not exactly correspond to 5 stages, the third of which is called the path of seeing. So this is a kind of path of seeing. Third stage in the path. During the next retreat on Asanga and Yogacara, we will be talking about the 5 stages in this path, one of which corresponds to the path of seeing. I have some familiarization with seeing from my own point of view because I have lots of vision challenges. And since 1996, I've gone through a number of periods where my vision would render me without being able to read and without being able to drive. And fortunately, because I have good doctors, my vision has been somewhat restored, but I'm going through a phase right now where my vision is getting worse again. But this is only the vision of the flesh eye. But during the course of all of this, I had the opportunity to study the flesh eye a little bit, to understand the flesh eye better, the organ of the eye. And I was surprised what I found out is that actually when we see things, of course, like most people, I just expected that we have a retina. And the retina is where we see things. But that's very much of an oversimplification. In fact, the retina may be about 100 millimeters in size. We really only use, for most of our vision, when we're really looking at something and trying to see it, we're really only using about 5.5 millimeters, which is called the macula. And this is the densest area of the rods and cones where we pick up color and shape and form, and we're able to, through the magic of phototransduction, this gets sent through the optic nerve, where we get a mental representation of the object in the back of the brain. So really only the small section of the retina is highly functional. The rest rather peripheral. And then it turns out that there's even a smaller portion, about 1.5 millimeters in size, which is called the fovea, that's where we can really see things in detail. That's the only place in the eye where we can see things 20/20. So the fovea, which is only about 1% of the retina, turns out to give us about 50% of our vision, of what it is that we see. So we can use this as a little bit of a metaphor in saying that when a person is not mindful and the mind is wandering, it may wander all over the retinal field. And that when a person practices mindfulness, they're bringing their vision into focus in the macula. And they can begin to really see things as they are. And then ultimately, in the stage of concentration, a person is able to use kind of like this metaphor of the fovea, where they can actually focus deeply and really see things 20/20. So in this path of seeing, from the Buddhist tradition, we can begin to understand that we can look more deeply into how we're able to see things more clearly. There's one other part of the flesh eye that I would share with you in terms of the retina, and that is that there's a part of the retina where the optic disc, the optic nerve, fits into the back of the eye to get the information that the retina and the macula and the fovea are developing, cultivating. This optic disc is off-center. The fovea is right in the center where the lens focuses, but the optic disc is off-center, and this optic disc doesn't have any rods and cones. So this is virtually a blind area of the retina. We call it the physiological blind spot. It really is a blind spot. So our flesh eye, the function of the flesh eye is to see the physical world. Its structure is made up of the retina and the macula and the fovea. And then the obstacle the blind spot, our subjectivity. This higher eye has has a function of being able to see the different realms of consciousness and to be able to cultivate what's called the four immeasurables. This is the structure then of being able to have go beyond desire realm. We can develop loving kindness and compassion, etc. But the big obstacle is our senses, sense-based desire, pleasure, or desire for pleasure, and then the near and far enemies of loving kindness and compassion, etc., which is another teaching about how sometimes things look like loving kindness, but they're really just another form of attachment. The wisdom eye is able to see the path and develop the skills to travel the path. Its structure is to be able to help us to progress along this path and enter into the different stages of the path, for example, the stream enterer stage. For those people who are familiar with the designations. And the main obstacle would be the hindrances, the 5 hindrances, and the 10 fetters. This would get in the way. And the Dharma eye is able to see and penetrate into the emptiness. This is something that Master Linji was referencing. Learning how to be of benefit to all beings. And the obstacle would be the obstacle of duality. Seeing a separateness between ourselves and others. Missing the interconnectedness. And the Buddha eye is able to function to help us to reach ultimate nirvana. The structure is to be a universal teacher, and there are no obstacles in that path. Master Xinghua once asked a monk, "Where are you coming from?" And the monk said, "From a severe Zen place, or Chan place." Xinghua asked, "Did you bring the shout of the severe Chan place?" And the monk said, "I didn't bring it." Xinghua said, "Then you haven't come from there." The monk shouted, and Xinghua hit it. So this is important to understand. In the original Buddhist teachings, there are no examples of the Buddha hitting people. This only arises when Buddhism comes to China, as far as I know. This is a cultural teaching method. And there are some examples of, for instance, when the Buddha gives his discourse on the lion's roar, there may be some examples of shouting, but not much in the original Buddhist teaching. But in China, Chinese Buddhism, Chan, lots of shouting. But if you look carefully into the teaching, you'll see that when people shout, they utter a sound. They're not usually shouting anything negative or positive to the person. They're just emitting a sound. And the sound is surprising and shocking. It comes from the depth within the teacher. And it's designed to kind of, I believe, to kind of startle the person out of their normal way of looking at the world. To kind of shake them from their pattern. The same thing with the hitting. There are no examples of, Master Linji hitting somebody and then the person having to go and get treatment for it. They're not hitting that way. Usually with a stick. I know I wasn't there, so I don't know, but my guess is that they just gave them a little tap to kind of wake them up. Startle them out of their usual way. And the tap and the shout are not necessarily always negative. Sometimes it may be an affirmation of the person. You got it right. Sometimes to kind of to shake the person out of their habit energy, their incorrect view. This is similar to a story about a newcomer who went to see Master Linji. This is also in the text that's related to his disciple Xinghua. The master's first ordained name, we won't go there. So one day, Linji asked a newcomer, "Where have you been of late?" The newcomer replied, "Wanzhang," that's the name of a place. Linji asked, "I have something to ask you, may I?" And the newcomer replied, "I have just been ordained, so I don't know anything." And Linji said, "You can crash the state of Tang, but you will not easily find a man who does not know anything. Go to the Chan meeting hall." So when Xinghua heard this, he was present, he said to Master Linji, he said, "Did you mean to strip him of discrimination?" And Linji retorted, "Who is interested in stripping or not stripping them of discrimination?" And Xinghua said, "The Venerable Master Linji knows only how to play with a dead bird lying on the ground, but does not know how to turn words for the occasion in order to cover it up." Interesting challenge. And Linji asked, "What would you do on this occasion?" So a little explanation here. So Linji had kind of made a joke of this newcomer who said, "I don't know anything," because that can be understood in two ways. On one level, not knowing anything is not knowing anything, that's ignorance. On the other level, not knowing anything means the person doesn't have any discrimination, and so therefore all things are without duality, and then therefore knowing something or not knowing something is the same. This is a very high state of awareness. So Linji said to the newcomer, "Oh, you don't know anything. This is a very high state of awareness. That's amazing if you can do that." So Xinghua was kind of playing with his teacher back and said, "Oh, you're just treating him like a dead bird, like an ignorant person who doesn't know the difference, but you didn't really do anything with him. You didn't really help him out." So Linji says to Xinghua, "Well, maybe you could tell me something, what you would do." So Linji repeated the newcomer's words, "I have just been ordained and do not know anything." And then Xinghua said, "In fact, it is my fault." This is what he said. And Linji said to him, "Your words hide a sharp dagger." And as Xinghua intended to speak, Linji struck him with a stick. So this is the kind of dialogues that you'll read, and these are kind of confusing and difficult for most of us because even though they're in English and not in Chinese, that, what does this mean? What could this be about? So when they role-played the situation and Linji was the newcomer, and Xinghua said, in fact, it is my fault. This was indicating to the newcomer that he wanted to teach him. He wanted to give him some teachings. But Linji saw this as kind of like a sharp dagger, that he was kind of poking at him. All right, I'm going to give you a teaching. The person didn't necessarily ask for one. So he said, you're containing a sharp dagger here. This could hurt the person's feelings. So these are the kinds of ways in which the master would instruct someone and help them to learn more clearly about the teachings. So there are lots of stories. I will maybe go back to this master a little bit, but I want to talk just about the last story of Master Xinghua. So there was an emperor. I'm not actually sure that he was, he's referenced here that he was an emperor of the later Tang Dynasty, but the later Tang Dynasty had not come into play for another number of years, so that I'm not sure that this historical record is accurate. Xuankuan was the fellow's name, the emperor, but he was not emperor at this time because he didn't become emperor until 923, and this story takes place in 888. But the story is that he gave the master a horse, but when the master first rode the horse, he got frightened and he threw the master to the ground and injured one of his feet. And then the master asked for the chief monk to make a walking stick for him, and when he was ready, he used it to walk around the monastery. And the master asked the monks, "Do you still recognize me?" And the monks replied, "How dare we fail to recognize you?" And the master, Xinghua, said, "A lame monk can speak but cannot walk." And when he reached the Dharma hall, he ordered the Karma Daima, I'll speak about that in a minute, to ring the bell, and then he spoke some words, and no one responded to him, and he threw away the walking stick, sat down, and passed away. So this is the last story of Master Xinghua. But maybe another time I'll tell some of his other stories. Karmadana. This is a word that we don't hear very often. This is the person who is the manager of the Zen, of the Chan monastery. Not necessarily the chief monk, but the person who is the manager. And I don't know if the venerables are familiar, probably. Wei Zhong, this is the manager of the affairs, or the Shoshi. Maybe some of these terms might be familiar. Shi Shi, these terms may be familiar. This is the person who's the manager. We all need to learn how to be the manager of our own mind, so that when an experience happens, we're able to see it not just with our flesh eye, but also with higher eye, wisdom eye, Dharma eye, eventually Buddha eye, so we can see it very clearly. So we practice meditation, mindfulness, in order to get rid of the obstacles so we can see things clearly. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and causes of suffering. never being separated from the altruistic joy which is free from suffering. May we all dwell in the great equanimity which is free from attachment, aversion,